and have recordings of different topics of conversations that we have. And please remember that tonight is being recorded. If you choose not to obviously be on camera, we'll keep questions to the end if possible, unless there's something really that you can't get off of your mind until you've had the answer. Our recordings are always placed on our website. Canada 2020 is the name of the business that you'll find the website on, and you'll find the blogs on those websites. Follow us on social media. But tonight I'm joined with two special guests. Obviously, I am from Canada 2020, as is the team. And thank you for joining us. We've got Skeen across in the back with all of the good food and the insurance support and making sure that everything happens. Estelle, who makes sure that all of the recordings happen correctly, but does a lot more than that. And anybody who's worked with Estelle knows exactly that. Banking, helping with our employee benefits, pension funds, provident funds, and wills and trusts, and making sure that all of the vitality stuff gets answered to a large extent. We have Lisa and Lesedi. Lisa looks after all the life and the invest, and Lesedi makes sure that all of our filing is up to date, that the appointments are booked, and that the minutes are taken, and everything happens there. We have Simon, who's joined us on an internship whilst he finishes his degree, and I've asked him probably 25 times, what are you studying? And he tells me, and I still can't remember what he's studying. He's in his final year. I believe that he's smart enough that he doesn't need to study in the afternoons, and he'll pass. And we trust and hope that he does. And he's checking out to see whether financial advisory is a career of choice that he may want to go down in his year after he's graduated. So without my team, I couldn't possibly do it. So thank you. But without my customers and my clients, I certainly wouldn't be able to do it. Tonight, I have Lindsay with me, and she is no longer part of my team. She is part of Candid Wealth Advisory Services, which is an independent brokerage. She has contracts and licenses with Liberty, Momentum, PPS, Alan Gray, and all sorts of other, giving depth and assisting clients with those contracts where she needs to, a CFP, and certainly going to be adding some value to our discussion tonight. And then I have Petrus here, and Petrus and I have recently met through the BNI Business Network Initiative, and he is an author, and I think I'm probably not going to do justice, as I didn't do to Simon's degree, and perhaps I should just let you know that he is an auditor, a businessman, which gives us a lot of depth to the discussion that we're going to be having tonight. So Petrus, thank you for joining us. I'm sure by the end of the evening, we'll get to know him a lot better and a lot more. And he's here to give some insights on business continuity, business protection, business options of extracting capital from your business. And we'll be talking through that through the next 40 minutes or so. And Lindsay is going to be asking all sorts of questions that we can hopefully have some answers to. So sit back, relax, enjoy your evening, and make some notes of mental notes of any questions you may have, and we'll be sure to answer those as we get to the end of it. It is business insurance. And I want to ask you all to humor me for a minute and close your eyes and just to think through a business. It might be your own business. It might be the business you work for. It might be a business you know of. And just to imagine the business elements. Who is the owner? Are there many owners? Are there banks involved and financial institutions? Are there suppliers? Are there clients? Hopefully there's some employees that's working through them, with them. And if you can just imagine that business, particularly if it's your own, and you just think of one of those business owners, and if yesterday afternoon, God forbid, there was a fatal accident, and that business owner was not at work this morning, what would have happened? What would the staff have done? What would the suppliers have done? And it's a sober, horrible thought. And if we open our eyes and we think through what would have been the scenario this morning, we're going to talk through some practical examples and some solutions potentially that could be put in place that may have a different outcome. Where do we start?
I think I'll start by asking the question of, who of you have had that experience where a client of yours, a business owner, has passed away suddenly, unexpectedly? What happened?
Well, unfortunately, being auditors, obviously, we had quite a few, especially during COVID. As example, one was 3 siblings involved in the company, and 2 of them literally died within a week. And left the admin person literally in charge and with the company in financial disarray. And so yes, there's definitely a lot of examples like that, unfortunately. And what do you do? Because literally the company, which is a production company, was left with the sales manager and the CEO literally overnight effectively taken out of the business.
What did they do? Where did they start? What does the surviving partner do?
Luckily for them, they actually had key man policies, insurance policies in place, and they also co-opted the accountant to actually get involved in the company and start to stabilize the ship effectively, sorting out the financial liabilities and go from there. And luckily for them, they're actually quite a success story today.
Wow. I think that lends to some of the consulting I do for business clients, is to say there should be 5 people sitting around the table. I always say the business owner, the accountant, auditor, the banker who's financing and giving some finance, the attorney who's doing the legal work, and then the financial advisor, because each one of those people wear a different hat. They have a different responsibility. They look at it from a different angle. I'm certainly, as a financial advisor, not a lawyer. I don't do contracts. I don't do crossing the T's, dotting the I's, but I see it from a financial aspect. So you say the accountant stepped in and assisted to steer the ship?
And it was all about continuing with the business, but also stabilizing, making sure that production could still run, and effectively saving the company in the process. So it's getting people on board, having the right contracts obviously in place. That's always the footwork to go on. And yes, that's what they did quite successfully.
Shirley, maybe you can explain to us what that key person insurance was that they had in place, and why would they have had something like that in place?
Mm-hmm. Typically, a business is reliant in some instances on key people. We call it key man. I think that's really sexist. I think it's time we need to definitely get that changed.
Individual.
But let's say key person assurance, and those key people are fundamental in the business. It might be potentially a supplier, or it might be an engineer, a marketing person, somebody who's the business is reliant on. And the business has the opportunity to say that in the event of the absence of this person as a result of death or disability, that we're going to be short of cash and inflow of income, expertise, etc. So a business has the opportunity of identifying key people and ensuring their lives, and having a premium that is paid by the company. The policy is owned by the company. The company will be the beneficiary in the event of the death of that individual, and give the company the opportunity to employ a new person, recruit. It comes with costs. Train, develop somebody in the business. Perhaps just deal with the loss at that particular point in time. So key person is really a great piece of insurance that I think every business should be looking at when there is a key person in the business.
And we often see businesses with, let's say, multiple shareholders, or legal partnerships where there are 3 partners. What would you suggest one would implement to protect that business and protect the beneficiaries of those business owners should one of those business owners pass away?
Well, I think, the fact that Petrus is perhaps giving us an example of this business is possibly something to say, and I hear what the question you're asking, Lindsay, is who is the shareholder? We have 3 shareholders in your instance. 2 of them have passed away. Oh, gosh, that nearly didn't work out quite so well. One of them remains. The deceased estate is now the shareholder of the shares, and in which case the executor by default is the new shareholder and has a responsibility, which is certainly not something that any executor is equipped and geared to and wants to actually be the new shareholder. So in that case, what we probably would look to do is potentially say, is there somebody else who would buy those shares from the estate? And then we look to put in place a buy and sell agreement. But I think what's important is there's no one size fits all. I think that's what we've experienced over the years, is that it's each case dependent. Families. Do we necessarily need to have a buy and sell for families? Well, yes, if there's a spouse involved, absolutely. Because if the shareholder dies and there's no will in place and there's no buy and sell in place, who actually gets the first option to buy those shares? So a buy and sell agreement is a traditional way of having an agreement between the shareholders as to what's going to happen to the shares in the event of the death. What happened in that instance, Petrus, from your experience? Was there a buy and sell?
There was no buy and sell. Like there was a family-owned business, so it was effectively sorted out with the executive of the estate. It was obviously known to the family, but it's all about the continuity. So they wanted the continuity, obviously, in the family, and that is what they created, although they didn't particularly foresee such eventuality, but there was some sort of continuity that they put.
I think they're very fortunate that the business survived.
Yes.
I think it would have been a very dismal, sad state of affairs had the business collapsed as a result of this and circumstances, economy, etc., because then there would be a loss of income in the estate, a loss of capital that could have actually been made provision for. So buy and sells are so important.
I think we've historically had the example of a wife or a partner, spouse, being a beneficiary on the business. But the wife or the partner, spouse, husband doesn't necessarily want to be involved in the business. So I think creating that liquidity for them to be able to, for the company be able to buy the shares, etc., rather giving that beneficiary some capital to live off, it's quite helpful in your estate planning as well.
But I also think it's important that continuity is always taken into account. Because, as example, another client, which is actually in the farming community, is basically on the point of retiring. And nobody really wants to go into the business of farming. So he's sitting with a question of either selling the farm or reinventing the methodology of how he's farmed, in terms of converting into a company and then a manager, as example, operate the company, and then as a shareholder, the family will then benefit and not physically be involved in the farming. So it's all about the continuity and planning for unique circumstances, because everyone is unique in how circumstances do change, and everyone is different. So it's all dependent on that.
I think that's what I see often as well, is that sometimes people can't see who could potentially be buying the shares in the business. And sometimes it's opportunity to actually look outside and say, is there somebody else who may have an interest in buying it? We always think that a buy and sell agreement needs to be between existing shareholders. It doesn't necessarily need to be. It could be one dental practice and a second dental practice that may agree to actually buy out the shares of the deceased's practice. Obviously, we're going a little bit technical with legal requirements in terms of, is it structured in an Inc. or is it in a personal capacity, and is there licenses, etc. But I think the purpose of the discussion is to say, think beyond the obvious of, I have 2 shareholders, that surviving shareholder needs to buy it. Maybe they don't want to. They don't want to carry this whole responsibility themselves. Perhaps there is an alternative. And that's what I think, having those 5 people sitting around a table often gives you the opportunity to discuss, to find alternatives that may be interesting to the business.
And we're speaking about, possibly buying part of a business. How does one understand what the value of their business is? Is it important to keep your valuations up to date? I mean,
I think a proper understanding about valuation and what the company is worth is quite fundamental. And unfortunately, when we talk about a valuation of a company, it's emotional investment a lot of shareholders actually make. So the value that they see is not necessarily the value that somebody, third party, is willing to pay. But it's all about extracting of the value and to have at least an idea of what the company is worth in terms of various methodologies and standards so that we can value a company. But that you don't have an over expectation that how can I put this, that the value of the business is overinflated and is not really attracting potential investors. But it's all about planning. It's all about putting in things in paper and really thinking about it. And that to me is the most important thing there.
I think, Shirley, you mentioned earlier that, evaluating a business sometimes can take a while, but it's crucial just to have something in place to get as a starting point.
And I think if we take your example, Lindsay, of 3 shareholders, it's imperative that those 3 shareholders agree on a value. And yes, it might be using one methodology and not the other, and one accountant will say it's this and the shareholder will say it's that, but to find a value. And if the shareholders have agreed, there's a starting point. And I find a lot of people actually procrastinate on that point. Instead of just doing something, they do nothing. And then 6 years later, there's still no solution in place. What's very important, and you touched on it, of keeping that value up to date, is that there are tax implications all the way. If you've undervalued the shares and you are selling them for R1 million, but they're actually worth 10 million rand, donations tax will kick in because you're actually donating the balance of those shares. So having the right value in place is not only imperative so that the family of the deceased gets the true value, it's also there from an income tax point of view and keeping SARS happy. If you're overinflating, SARS is probably not going to be looking too much because that's going to be the value of the shares in the estate. But undervaluing is certainly a very, very big problem and not something that should be taken lightly. And there's an agreement in the background that says that the 3 shareholders have agreed that the value of the business is X. So if the spouse says, or the executor says, thank you very much, I'll buy the shares for that, it can become very problematic if the share price is too low, if it's not the right.
Who would say it's too low? Would that be SARS?
Absolutely.
Because remember, the value, especially with SARS, is about fair market value. Unfortunately, with any valuation, it is subjective. It's not really objective test. And 2 valuators will have a different valuation. But we do follow a standard methodologies, or the very standard methodologies, provided you're within the scope of the evaluation, that makes a difference. And maybe to also connect with what Shirley said, if you look at the 5 advisors or 5 important people around the table, they would usually advise about the best methodology to use for your circumstances. And especially you get buy and sell agreements. As the value of the company grows, you also need to look at the buy and sell agreement in terms of not being less, the payout being less than the value of the company. So it's all, yet again, part of the planning, part of the risk management of the whole process.
And I think it's actually just this funny anecdote of, we had a client who's got a great little business going, and he says that we can't keep up with updating the buy and sell values all the time because their business is growing so fast. And I mean, what a great problem to have in a way, but it's really important to have they see the value in having the real value of the business and the accurate value of the business insured.
Yes, but it's all about the continuity, constantly keeping yourself up to date. What is the value of the company, and planning for the unforeseen, because unfortunately that's a reality.
I think a lot of people go down the line of putting in place the insurance policies for the buy and sell and lose sight of the actual agreement. And the agreement is fundamental. because a beneficiary on the policy, if there's no contract or agreement in place, can use those proceeds for whatever they choose to.
Yes.
So the buy and sell agreement is critical. The policies that fund it are creating liquidity for the deceased estate or the surviving shareholders, my apologies, for being able to buy it from the deceased estate. So the policy is one part of it, but it's certainly not the starting point. It certainly should be the end. The buy and sell agreement is the fundamental document that's critical.
And we were actually earlier just talking about a story where there wasn't that kind of agreement in place, but that was more based on a partner who signed for surety. So let's say you've signed for a loan for the business and now you passed away. What happens in that instance if you don't have the right policies, contracts in place?
Well, I think the question that needs to be asked is, when we sign a surety, what do we think? And the reality is, when we sign a surety, we think that we're liable for it, which we are. We don't realize that death does not stop at that point. If we've signed surety, we are liable even after death, which means the estate is going to need to have the liquidity to settle that surety, to settle the liability. So liability, surety does not cease at death, it continues. And I always say to my clients, if the business needs your signature to be able to get that loan or that facility, the business should have the ability to have a life policy on your name that pays out to the policy, to the business, to be able to settle that debt. And what you're alluding to, Lindsay, was in a course that we attended a couple of weeks ago, where they actually said there was a real life case scenario with the Discovery Life policy, where there was a surety protection policy in place, 10 million rand. And the surety passed away, and the policy paid out to the company. The surviving 4 directors and shareholders in the business declared dividends and immigrated and left the estate with the liability of the 10 million. So it's very important that we either look to seed it or to make sure that there is a contract in place that says those funds will be used to settle the liability and make sure that your estate is not liable for it. So quite important.
Yeah, it's quite a scary fact, that one. Have you, in your experience of deceased estates or valuing businesses, come into contact with any interesting cases that you want to share?
There's always a lot. So it's difficult maybe to, oh, it's the one, it's actually a farm. And I think that's also an important thing, coming back to the 5 important people as well. The farmer relied on his accountant, and when he passed away, it was found that everything was not up to date. And I literally mean, we discovered, as example, a farm that was in a closed corporation, which was deregistered by the CIPC, that didn't update the annual returns for 17 years. And to start to realize, after you've trusted the person for so many years, that things are not up to date, and then obviously to sit with the loss and also the continuation of the farming activity was quite daunting. And we're talking about quite a few 100 million rands of farming equipment and enterprise.
Wow.
And then also, because the farmer was fairly aged, it was a question of who's now going to farm. Because his 2 daughters were all doctors. They had no interest in farming. And there was no one really, except for luckily for them, for the what do you call that? Grandchild, thank you, to take over the farming activity.
I think that ties in with our discussion on succession planning. How important it is, especially I think in family businesses or businesses where you just assume, oh, the children will carry on with it.
And
Do they want to?
Unfortunately, we're seeing a trend that a lot of children don't want to follow in the footsteps of the founders. And it's a reality. So the global trend, to an extent, if we in particular talk about farming, is then to create a company that the shareholding will still belong to the children, as example, but the management of the farm the farming company will then be carried out by professional managers and people looking after that. So that definitely is a trend we're seeing. And I think it's quite a valuable one to definitely think about, because at the end of the day, as a business owner, if you've invested 30 to 40 years of your hard-earned blood and sweat into a company to form it, it's quite heart-wrenching to see a company actually go down or being dissolved because there's no one to continue that particular enterprise.
Succession planning is so important. It's building a business that somebody wants to own, somebody wants to take over, and then who are those possible people? And are they employees within your business? Are they external people that could come in? Or is there somebody who may want to buy your business? And I think that's also important. Something I've learned very recently is building your business from the ground up to be sellable, to be an interesting purchase for somebody outside there. And
especially in that scenario, it's about extraction of the value. Because at the end of the day, we work so many blood hours, literally, in a company. Yet again, it's heart-wrenching not to see you extract the value from the company. And yet again, it's all about that strategic planning, putting the right things into place, whether or not management, and then to take the hard decision and see what is the best option going forward. But like anything in life, it changes. So it needs to be adaptable to the circumstances.
Absolutely. I think one of the things, Lindsay, you mentioned that the winding up of the estates is problematic. It takes a long time. We know that. There's a lot of obstacles and hurdles along the way that need to be dealt with. But having no succession plan in place for the business, a buy and sell agreement in place, contingent liability to settle the liabilities in the estate, just makes it even more time-consuming, strenuous, and difficult for the executive to even start winding it up. So to try and have as many of those issues dealt with is going to speed up the winding up of the estate and the continuation of business. You know, the business needs to continue. There's employees that need to be paid. There are suppliers, creditors, etc. And if the deceased estate is wound up and being tied to that shareholding because there is no continuity plan, it is so sad because it cripples a business very quickly.
Have you seen any cases where good financial planning has helped, or any cases where you've seen that this person is not good financial planning?
Right. So those companies that haven't had the foresight of putting things in place, key man policies, share buyback, are not long here. So whereas those that have the proper planning can actually extract the value. And as Shirley also said, when it's winding up at the estate, it just lessens the burden on everyone left behind. Because it's traumatic in itself, but it is worse when it's not properly done and there's no forethought about what is going to happen should the eventuality like that actually occur.
If I was now a business owner that had a partner who were just starting to kind of get off the ground, what would you suggest would be our first, port of call in terms of that business planning?
Well, like anything, I like a shareholders agreement to begin with. I do believe that proper footwork starts with paperwork. And the shareholders agreement is literally, it forces oneself to think about all the eventualities. And unfortunately, like marriages, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out. And there needs to be a method in how values are extracted for parties, or sometimes it can even be a toxic relationship that needs to end. And it's just the methodology of how to go to the next phase without being more destructive than the next. And then obviously they have as Shirley said, that 5 important people in the business constantly involved. As I made about the mention about the accountant that didn't do their work, it's a question of also being on top of that. In all orders, we do make mistakes, but it's making sure that the financial statements are actually submitted to SARS. I promise you, for 17 years not being having submitted tax returns, do not carry favors with SARS. And it creates a massive emotional burden to those left behind. So that definitely is the starting point. And then obviously to think about the things going forward. If one looks at extraction of value, to me it's always important, because unfortunately people don't always think about that in what you want to do and how you want to leave your legacy. But also, my honest opinion, if you work for 30 or 40 years in your company, surely you need some reward for that investment. So yeah, that definitely is a starting point.
I think you mentioned, that's so interesting. I've never thought about it before. Having those 5 people sitting around the table on a regular basis, an annual basis at least, you're going to be kept informed of the changes in the business. Well, you bought new machinery. Did you sign surety? Yes. Is there enough liquidity to settle it? No, because I wouldn't have financed it if I had the liquidity. Have you got the policy in place? And I think 5 people sitting around the table, it's going to be very hard for somebody to hide.
There's always paperwork.
There's always
There's always
paperwork.
paperwork.
And somebody will be asking for the financials and, well, where are they? And where's the tax return? And where are they? Whereas if you're just having a quick casual meeting, it's very easy to hide. But when you're held accountable by other professionals, it's very hard to hide.
And Shirley, what would you say to the new business that's just created their shareholder agreement and is asking for assistance with continuity planning, business planning?
It's so difficult because there's no one size fits all. It would be a case of go and build your business, but build your business on solid principles. And I think the shareholders agreement is the starting point. Policies and procedures, processes in the business. Know what you're doing, keeping on top of the finances is critical. Having those dreams and those goals. It's very difficult at the outset to say, what do we need today? If I sit with a new business owner and I say to them, what's your value of your business? They'll go R1. And it is, unless there's capital that's been invested in the business, unless there's assets. But it's to say, be aware of it. These are your issues and your problems. If you died yesterday, who is going to be inheriting the shares? Do you want your partner, Jack's wife, to be your new shareholder and your new partner? And if you don't, then deal with it at that point in time. And make sure that you stay on top of it as you're going. Have regular discussions with those 5 people, particularly as your business is growing. I think it's stay informed, run your lane and do what you need to do. But at the same time, surround yourself with people whom you trust, who can assist and guide you whilst you're building the business.
I think just linking onto that is, in the past, we've also encouraged, especially family businesses where there are possibly children involved or grandchildren, that you are having those regular discussions. Everyone's on the same page. Can we sell this business? So that you're having those regular check-ins.
Yeah. I always say it's a family business. It's a family discussion. It's to have the hard discussion points with the family so that they know. I think there's nothing worse than somebody passing away and nobody knowing where to even start. If we go back to our thought of our eyes closed and this person not coming to work this morning, imagine if they have no idea of what's happening. It's daunting, it's scary, it's frightening. When they have some idea and they know that there are these trusted advisors in place, they know who to reach out to and who to contact. So I do encourage that. I think, first of all, it's very important. Sometimes there can be a solution that comes from the children that you didn't even know was a possibility. And having those discussions is important, and being open and honest. We unfortunately don't talk about money. We don't talk about death. We don't like to. And we have experienced that the more it's spoken about, the easier it's to deal with. And the less shock and surprises come from a death.
We've spoken a lot about, obviously, the business planning and all of that, what that involves. But on the death of that individual, how critical is it that the will is up to date? Business interests are noted.
I think what's very important, if there is no will, there is no way. There is no direction. Yes, the law of intestate succession will guide us and give us some direction to it. But for anybody not to have a will, and particularly a business owner, in my opinion, is really irresponsible, because there are commitments and responsibilities to creditors, to employees, to all sorts of people, never mind the family that's left behind. So will to me is imperative. And, you know, it's an interesting point, Lindsay, you know, does the business interest need to be noted in the will? Your will deals with all of your assets, and your shareholding by default is an asset. I think sometimes shareholders don't realize that, funnily enough.
And maybe also on that point, personally, I don't want the state to obviously dictate my will to me. And if you don't have a will, that shouldn't be that as well, because it's governed by regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. So having a will in place is critical. You don't need to be listing all of your assets, because by default it will be included in it. However, certainly having a file that has a list of all of those assets of which the business interest is noted, where the share certificates are actually held, where the title deeds are held, etc. That to me is extremely good planning, and should be critical. And revisiting it on an annual basis to establish if there should be any changes. And I say annual, but it should be when there's a life-changing event. You know, when there has been a marriage, when there's been a death, when there's been a divorce. Very important.
Won't believe how many people never update their will after divorce. It's shocking.
And I think there's a small time frame where they will accept something, but after that, then they take the will as is.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
but sorry, also another important point is particular to wills, that unfortunately what we also see is a lot of the time important information is not shared between spouses. And it's sometimes very simple things like bank accounts, detail in terms of taxes, SARS, e-filing accounts, and that unfortunate reality, because that also creates a lot of problems for the spouse to let go.
We encourage our clients to have the what if file that should have a lot of that information in it, so that should something
creates for that eventually.
Exactly. There's just that little bit of preparedness for them that they can say, okay, let me start here, because there's all this other chaos that's going on around you. You need a starting point and some guidance from the grave.
Well, literally, I mean, it's just so much easier to at least from executive's point to literally go and you know with all the policies and obviously all the things you need to do from that perspective. And sorry, and also details of the company, because a lot of time people don't realize that the company or the shares of the company, if it's a CC even worse, is actually part of the estate, and that obviously can create a lot of difficulty for people left behind, because now the executive becomes part of your partnership, whatever the case may be, and that can create issues.
I think to me, it's the complexity of it. We've made it sound simple, difficult, all in the last 40 minutes. And I think I keep going back to there's not a one size fits all. There is understanding what your needs and your objectives are and putting in place a plan and a process for that, and keeping that conversation and that communication going, asking the questions, what would happen? Closing your eyes with your business partner, with your key people in the practice and the business, and going, what would happen if I wasn't here yesterday? And getting some idea and some thought on it, and asking the professionals around the table, what would happen? And then finding solutions to be put in place, not burying your head in the sand and hoping and praying it's going to go away, because it isn't. It's going to happen. It's a question of when, and it's a question of what will happen at that time and at that point. And staying on top of it, asking the questions and doing and putting in place the actions that's been spoken of.
And being as best prepared as a person can be.
Any other interesting anecdotes from your years as an auditor, seeing some interesting successes in business or possibly collapses in business?
Collapses, we see a lot. Well, that's more business rescues, which we also do. It's all about the management. So a lot of time when you do business rescues, to be quite honest, the management team, 99% of the time, if you've got a good management team, and even when I do evaluation, to me, the most important thing is actually the directors. If I've got if I value the directors, I will value a company far higher than I would normally do. So having the right people in place, either to support you or take over the business, is very important. And that, unfortunately, we see that the business rescues and even state-owned companies. It's just a reality.
I think I could sit here and ask questions all night long because it is a intriguing subject. And I think, unfortunately, a subject where we only learn when it's too late, either if it's been done right or if it's not been done right. And that's where I think it's important to have as many people ensuring that all of the T's have been crossed, the I's dotted, and the plan put in place to make sure that there's the best way. Any way forward is better than no way forward. And at least there's an opportunity then to do something and to move forward rather than having nothing.
I think then I'll take the opportunity to open the floor for any questions for Shirley or Petrus that you might have. Yeah.
So we've actually spoken about 2 weeks ago, and you said that what invitation.
We read
them. Thank you for this. So we both have our own businesses separate. I started my business about 2 years ago. I'm pretty much the only director, sole shareholder. But we have potential to get the out of work for the next probably 18 months. And so much so that I have to take on some help. I need someone that's going to be organized and stuff like that. So we've discussed it amongst ourselves. And obviously Susan, being an organization person as she is, probably the perfect example. I go do the work, she does the stuff. Now, would you advise that she becomes a shareholder in the business in case something happens to me where she can actually continue the business? Or if that doesn't happen and we have to go obviously the world route and everything and she gets everything over there, would that delay the process on her and having the ability to actually manage the business in the short term until the will and everything sorts everything out?
It all depends. So this is a typical audit answer. Sorry for that one. So the easiest one would be if she's a shareholder, it is so much easier to do the continuity when something happens. Yeah. So, and then also secondly, if you want to expand, my advice will also be to do valuation actually literally the moment or rather before you do. And that is to do when somebody buys into a company to have certain clauses as well so that you can extract the value as is. So that somebody doesn't, well, you need the value that you build up the company for. So that's probably you to do evaluation that stage.
It's very interesting. So you're saying that before you expand value.
Yes, because now it depends on the contract. So like anything is footwork. So there can be clauses, example, depending on whether or not or how the shares or the expansion of the shares are transacted or agreed upon, where there's certain performance guarantees, whatever case may be. And we also we that a lot in BE transactions, where certain, just call it key performances, are actually attached to certain key indicators. So that is just to extract value.
Anybody else?
So, you mentioned at the beginning you had these 2 people that died and there were 3 shareholders. And you said that maybe the 3rd shareholder could buy out the shares of the other people. But what happens if you haven't got the money to do so?
That's why you've got insurance product.
But typically in that scenario, we would use an insurance policy to provide liquidity to be able to buy out the shares. So for example, A would take out a life policy on B. When B dies, A will receive the proceeds of the policy, and the underlying agreement will say they must use those monies to purchase the shares, and they will become the shareholder.
The other thing is that in case of the individual bill, in case of the bill of business, what you have in case of a will.
Well, you've got the shares, which then obviously either belongs to the trust or individual. So if it belongs to individual, that shareholding will fall part of the estate.
Within your will. So it's one of your
I'm
assets.
talking about what does the business say about your will?
So the business, and correct me if I'm wrong, Meg, if I'm hearing you, they are the three shareholders in the business. There's a shareholders agreement that says, hopefully, that if they are selling their shares, that the other shareholders will have the first option. If not, it can go out to market.
So in other words, it isn't a will, it's just an agreement.
It's just an agreement. The
So
share.
it's only individuals that can have it.
I just got a particular thing. My son-in-law is an insurance assessor. He's got a street-name problem, which could erupt at any stage. In his wife, my daughter, is part of she does a lot of the work in this, and she's like a PR, or a
Yeah.
PA, yeah. So what happens if there isn't any agreement if he was to suddenly die? It could happen.
So if he were to suddenly die, he owns the shares. His will determine where those shares go. So his will say he's leaving them to the SPCA, or he's leaving them to your daughter, or he's leaving them.
But he's in the business. Now what happens about the business?
Are there many shareholders, or
Yeah,
just him?
It's just him.
It's just him. So he will then bequeath his shares in his estate to his wife, and she will now be the new shareholder. If she's equipped to be, if she's, and in which case, in a perfect healthy instance, he should have a key man policy on the business. The business should take out a key policy on him. If he passed away, an insurance policy. If he passed away, the proceeds would be paid to the company. She owns the company with this money. She can now go and recruit a new assessor to come in, and she can be the owner with an assessor who's now going to go and do the work and has the necessary qualifications. So that would be the perfect scenario. Sometimes when there is an illness and there's insurance is not possible, that becomes difficult. Building up cash reserves to be able to do that would be critical for her continued income. And also potentially to find another assessor who may wish to join forces with her so that they can then merge the two businesses potentially. That may be a solution. So, and I think again, no one size, one step fits all. It's literally a case of understanding the circumstances. The answer may be very different if it wasn't your spouse. The answer would be very different if your son-in-law wasn't potentially ill and have a life-threatening disease. So it's very much a case of sharing the information and putting heads together, 5 heads, to find a solution. Well, she can. She could become a shareholder, as in this instance, but it's not necessarily going to help her to get the work done, because who's going to employ her services if she's not skilled?
And very often when you have a business and you want to sell it, how do you know what the value of that business is?
That's where you hire Petrus.
The best is to do a business valuation, or sometimes it's just as easy to talk to an accountant and auditor. Because usually they will have a fair good idea about what the value of the company should be, or rather is. And unfortunately, it differs from what people expect it to. Because again, you put in a lot of time and effort to build a company, and then somebody like me tells you it's worth less than half than you think. And the reason nobody else is willing to pay for your blood insurance is easy.
The accountant is your starting point. Certainly your auditor verifying and giving you ideas and thoughts. Each business is valued in a very different way.
Yes, and even within the industry. So there's certain industries that will use a certain particular type of method in terms of valuation. And that is something that has been worked out through ages. So it all depends on the type of industry, your type of business. And again, sometimes just talking to your auditor and accountant, you'll get a lot of information. But if it's more specialized, obviously a business valuation.
And perhaps to even suggest to your daughter to go and get upskilled and trained so that she can be employed as the assessor may be the solution.
Good idea.
You see the importance of having meetings like this.
Having everyone at the table.
And then I think that that's the important thing, is that a lot of the time the subjects we are touching on it's not subjects people are comfortable to talk about. We're talking about continuity, we're talking about passing away, but it's so important because unfortunately we see that a lot, that people don't have those uncomfortable discussions, and when the eventual happens, it leaves the company in dire consequences.
Just on key man, there's insurance. How does that come in costing compared to just up in your own life cover instead?
It's the same. Unfortunately, the life assured determines what the premium is going to be. So typically you'll find your life insurance companies use the same rates, regardless whether it's personal insurance, business insurance, etc. What happens inevitably in the key man cover is that you strip out any of the disability, the severe illness, the income protections as such, which then reduces the cost considerably. A personal insurance policy would be protecting for dread disease, protecting for a disability, etc. Whereas key man cover typically is going to be covering you in death or total disability, which therefore reduces the costs. There are a few interesting ways to price it in terms of escalations on an annual basis. Business assurance in the form of a key man policy. Typically, we would take on high increases after 10 years. So sometimes having a different method of how that policy is costed. And in some instances, some companies actually do term assurance, which then says that we're only insuring for a period of 5 years or 10 years. Which then reduces the cost considerably too, because we know there's going to be an end date at say 70 or 80 or whatever that is, whereas a personal life policy will continue indefinitely until, as you're paying premiums until you die. So there are ways to lower the premium, but in answer to your question, the same rates table as such is used, whether it be your personal. The big thing for me is that the company should pay for it. The company will receive it. Never have a tax deduction of it, please. Make sure that you are not using the premium as a tax deduction in your company, unless it is an approved policy, which in most cases isn't. So please make sure it's not being written off as an expense. But the company should pay for it, as opposed to you using after-tax money in your personal capacity to pay for your personal life policy. Tax is usually the answer and the deciding factor on how to do things, in my opinion.
Mine as well.
Mentioned that the daughters were not interested in continuing to doing something. What were the conditions surrounding electing him?
It was literally, he was the only willing person to continue with it.
And was his skills through
Luckily for him, he had an interest in farming. So his grandfather literally took him under his wings in terms of educating, in terms of farming itself. If it was not for that, in all likely they would have sold the farm.
in terms of because I had that question that I have a couple of years of business head. So I'm interested in, he was qualified, but was there an agreement somewhere that then made it easy for him to take over?
There was no agreement. It was literally the only option they had. But usually with continuation, is that to literally have that discussion and see how one can actually continue the company. As an example, like the example I used with the three siblings, that two of them unfortunately lied. The surviving sibling took in the accountant, the existing accountant, who already knew the company and who took actually over the role as the CFO and stabilized the ship in terms of all the expenses and all the liabilities they had. And he also knew, because it's a manufacturing company, he already had knowledge in terms of costing and supplies, and that actually ensured the continuity so that they can actually get the proper managers in the company to then go forward.
Perhaps to answer your question, Mbali, is perhaps the children, the daughters, are feeling that they haven't got the value out of it. And in which case, there are different ways of structuring the will. This instance happened in the lifetime, which makes it easier to deal with and gives you options now in terms of how to extract capital in the estate to give to the children, the daughters as such. But it's so there's no agreement necessarily unless you structure a company, and in which case the shareholders and the agreements within the business could be that they're going to fund the children going forward, etc. So there's always a solution. It's to find the best solution and make sure that it's going to work for all parties.
It's literally having the discussion and then see what fits the particular situation. Because, like Shirley said as well, there's no one size fits all. It is really how a family, or because some, this family dynamics as well. Let's be honest, and you also got to take that into account.
Any other questions as we come to the end of our evening?
I've got one last quote for you to leave you hanging on. Your business deserves a future, even if you're not there to lead it.
A legacy.
That's very powerful. Very powerful. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petrus.
Pleasure.
Tonight would not have been possible without you, so I appreciate your input and your insights. I think it's certainly a very refreshing change to our typical talks that we have. And I really appreciate your time and your effort and your insights. I appreciate that, and thank you. And to each and every one of you for joining us, thank you. Thank you for my team. I hope you've learned lots. Next week, next month, we're getting closer and closer to the end of the year, but we look forward to seeing you soon. And thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
As part of Christmas and children,